Have you ever imagined your security camera capturing the exact moment your life turns into a neighborhood thriller? Well, it happened to me. My name is Noah Carter, and this is the insane story of how my obsessed neighbor, the HOA queen of Maple Ridge Residences, tried to turn my backyard into a concrete tomb and ended up unearthing a scandal involving cops, a giant inflatable porcupine, a federal agent, and even my 82-year-old grandma with a garden hose. If you think HOAs are just about boring finds, buckle up, because this is Hollywood-level chaos. I moved to Maple Ridge last year, escaping the chaos of the big city like someone fleeing a fire that defies explanation. The traffic, the noise, the notifications flashing on my phone all day. I was done. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and after landing a fat contract with a trendy clothing brand, the kind that sells 200 real t-shirts with ironic slogans, the money hit my account like a gift from the universe. That's when I decided, I'm going to invest in a dream, something tangible, just mine. Turning the backyard of my new house into a private paradise became the perfect plan. No mansion with crystal chandeliers or a 5-car garage. I wanted simplicity with soul. I pictured every detail. A compact infinity pool, the kind that seems to blend into the horizon, even if the horizon in Maple Ridge is just the neighbor's. Roof. Next to it, an oak deck, warm and rustic, with a built-in grill that already had me dreaming of smoked ribs and cold beer. To top it off, a light pergola covered with vines I'd somehow convinced to grow, and hanging lights that at night would look like lazy stars floating in the air. It wasn't about showing off. It was a space to breathe, read a book, invite some friends, and forget the world. I got to work, or rather, to my mouse. I built a polished 3D model in SketchUp, tweaking every angle like it was a portfolio. Our project. I chose a neutral, almost therapeutic palette, soft beige for the exterior walls, charcoal grey for the finishes, and a hint of moss green in the cushions and details, a nod to the forest surrounding the town. Before swinging a hammer, I followed the rules to a T. I submitted the plans to the HOA, the homeowners committee that decides what you can or can't do with your own house. I thought it'd be smooth sailing. The project came back approved. 4-1. 4 yeses, 1 no. The no had a first and last name, Rachel Coleman, the HOA president, and the storm I didn't see brewing in Maple Ridge's clear sky. I didn't know it yet, but that lone no was the first shot in a war I hadn't signed up to fight. Rachel Coleman is the type of person who thinks the neighborhood is her kingdom, and she's the absolute queen, complete with an invisible scepter and crown. At the HOA meeting, she stood up with the air of someone who'd just watched a documentary on neoclassical architecture and spent 25 minutes lecturing. According to her, my pergola would disrupt the rustic chic harmony of Maple Ridge, as if the neighborhood were a magazine decor exhibit. The hanging lights? Too bohemian, she said with a sniff, as if I were planning to host a folky music festival in my backyard. I sat there, arms crossed, trying not to laugh, while the other 4 committee members rolled their eyes in such sync it looked choreographed. In the end, my project passed, 4-1. I left the room with a weight off my chest, thinking, all right, problem solved, onward and upward. Sweet delusion. I thought her no would die there, but I underestimated the power of a woman with free time, a color printer, and an obsession with rules. Days later, the letters started arriving, dropped in my mailbox like royal decrees. The first, $50 fine because my cactus on the porch, a harmless green spiky thing I'd brought from the city, was threatening the neighborhood's visual aesthetic. I read it twice to make sure it wasn't a joke. A week later, another letter. My welcome sign, hand-carved by a local artisan, was deemed 2.5 centimeters taller than the regulation limit. She attached a photo of the sign with a ruler next to it, circled in red, like evidence of a heinous crime. Each letter came with her signature in giant letters, taking up half the page, written in purple ink that screamed, "I'm important." And at the end, a hand-drawn heart emoji, the kind that, instead of affection, seemed to say, "I hate you" in Morse code. I started keeping the letters in a folder, half laughing, half intrigued. Did she measure every plant in the neighborhood with a tape measure? Did she spend her nights reviewing the HOA handbook with a glass of wine and a highlighter? Rachel wasn't just a nuisance. She was a mystery, a force of nature with postage stamps and a personal vendetta against my backyard. The project kicked off in June, with the sun shining and that fresh start vibe in the air. I hired a dream team. Tony, an Italian contractor who looked like he'd stepped out of a Fellini film, with calloused hands and a voice that belted out opera arias while he laid bricks. O Sole Mio never sounded so good over the hum of a cement mixer. And Lisa, a landscaper with a gift for turning even a pile of dirt into a living painting, with ideas that made you want to hug a plant. We were on fire, laughing loud, measuring the land, picturing the deck finished and the pool reflecting the sky. It was the kind of energy that made you forget about bills. But Rachel, she made sure we didn't forget that hell has neighbors. Suddenly, she turned into a Category 5 hurricane, except instead of wind and rain, she came armed with a gleaming silver SUV and a determination that bordered on absurd. Every single day, there she was, parking on my street like she was laying siege. Stepping out of the car with an iPad in hand, snapping photos of my backyard with the seriousness of a CSI detective, while scribbling notes in a sparkly purple notebook, the kind full of glitter you'd find in a scrapbook store, or a unicorn-obsessed teenager's bedroom. I swear you could see that notebook sparkle from 3 blocks away. One day, she completely lost it. Tony was mixing concrete for the pool base, singing Nessun Dorma with a trowel in hand, when Rachel appeared out of nowhere, pointing her finger like an apocalyptic prophet. That concrete is too grey for the neighborhood's earthy tones, she yelled, a vein pulsing on her forehead. Tony stopped, looked at me with those seen-it-all eyes, and replied in a thick accent, Signora, it's concrete, not cappuccino. I nearly choked laughing, but she didn't find it funny. I tried to be the diplomatic guy, you know. I took a deep breath, put on my best smile, and said, Rachel, want to see the approved plans? Let's grab a coffee, talk like adults, sort this out. She turned to me with a look that mixed contempt and disbelief, as if I'd just suggested selling crack on the corner. Noah, she said, pausing for dramatic effect, I don't negotiate with people who profane the sanctity of Maple Ridge. Sanctity? I blinked, trying to process that. This coming from the woman who keeps a 3-meter-tall inflatable porcupine in her front yard, with bulging eyes and a creepy smile, which she somehow got HOA approval for as a community art expression. That thing just sits there swaying in the wind, staring down the street like a psychedelic guardian. And my pergola was the problem? Rachel wasn't just a thorn in my side. She was a walking paradox with Wi-Fi and an iPad. Things escalated fast, like wildfire in dry grass. A week after surviving the 2 grey concrete drama, an emergency notice from the HOA showed up, printed on letterhead with screaming red letters like it was a nuclear alert. According to the text, an anonymous neighbor, who, let's be real, had Rachel's DNA SUV and sparkly purple notebook, complained that my pool's LED lights were white, not yellow. This apparently violated some obscure rule no one in Maple Ridge had ever heard of, not even Tony, who's renovated half the houses in the neighborhood. The notice ordered everything to stop, construction, dreams, sanity, for 8 weeks for a so-called special committee review. 8 weeks. It was the kind of deadline that made you want to toss the HOA handbook into a bonfire and dance around the flames. I lost my patience. I'm not one to blow up, but there's a limit to how much nonsense a human can take before turning into the Hulk. I grabbed my copy of the HOA handbook, a thin booklet smelling of recycled paper with basic rules like don't paint your house purple, and marched to Rachel's house at 10 a.m. on a sunny Saturday. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass, birds were singing, and I was ready for war. I knocked on her door hard enough to wake up the inflatable porcupine, which stared at me from the yard like a silent judge. She opened the door slowly, like a scene from a suspense movie, and there she was, Rachel Coleman in the flesh holding a mimosa, at 10 a.m., the orange liquid bubbling like she just toasted to my downfall. She was wearing a silk robe patterned with flamingos, her hair tied in a perfect bun, and a cynical smile that said, I knew you'd come. Before she could open her mouth, I brandished the handbook like a sword and fired off, Show me where it says that, Rachel. White lights versus yellow 8-week review. Prove to me that exists. She let out a nasal chuckle, took a sip of her mimosa, and replied with the calm of someone who'd already won the argument before it started. Noah, my handbook is the presidential edition. It has addendums you don't have access to. Then, like some twisted magic trick, she turned, grabbed a thick book from the side table that looked like it came from a secret bunker, fake leather cover, gold edges, bursting with colorful post-its sticking out like flags of a cult. She flipped to a page marked with a purple post-it, of course, and pointed to a paragraph written in a font so tiny it was illegible without a magnifying glass. Here, Section 47B, Ambient Lighting, she said, with the tone of someone reciting scripture. I stared at that tome, which looked more like a conspiracy diary or the draft of a dystopian novel, and thought, this woman isn't just an HOA president. She's a video game final boss with made-up rules and an endless supply of mimosa. I wasn't going to let it slide, not after the mimosa show and the presidential handbook that seemed written by a neighborhood dictator with OCD. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop and wrote an email to the HOA board requesting an urgent meeting. I attached the official handbook, the real one, the one everyone got when they moved in, no purple post-its or secret rules about yellow lights, and highlighted every relevant page in the PDF, like a lawyer building a case. I sent it with the subject line, immediate review of the president's actions, and waited. It didn't even take 10 minutes for 3 replies to pop into my inbox. Mrs. Jenkins, a sweet widow who bakes cookies for the whole street, wrote, "It's about time someone did something." Mr. Patel, a retired engineer who fixes lawnmowers for fun, replied, "This is ridiculous, Noah, we're with you." And young Emily, a 26-year-old tattoo artist who lives next door, got straight to the point. "Rachel's been out of control for months. Let's put a stop to this." We scheduled it for Thursday, 7 p.m. in the community room. I felt a wave of relief, like the cavalry was on its way. But Rachel, she didn't take the hit quietly. Minutes after my email went out, she replied, with a message in all caps that practically screamed off the screen, "This is an affront to my authority. As the elected HOA president, you will regret this insubordination." The email came with a digital signature loaded with titles: Rachel Coleman, President, Guardian of Maple Ridge Harmony, and of course, the heart emoji that had become her trademark venom. I read it and laughed out loud, picturing her pounding the keyboard with fake nails while the inflatable porcupine swayed outside, complicit in her meltdown. The week passed in a Cold War vibe, with sideways glances on the street, and Tony asking if he should bring a cousin to handle Fiat Italian style. I told him no, I'd play it clean. Until the night before the meeting, I was fine, focused on my work. It was midnight. Silence reigned in Maple Ridge, and I was editing a video in my office, headphones on, a cold cup of coffee on the desk, the monitor light reflecting off my glasses. Then I heard it. A low, mechanical sound that cut through the stillness like a chainsaw in a horror movie, a persistent beep of a truck backing up. I jumped up, yanked off my headphones, and ran to the window, heart in my throat. What I saw nearly made me choke on the air I didn't even realize I was holding. A massive concrete truck, the kind with a spinning drum, was parked in my backyard, its wheels crushing the grass Lisa had just fixed. And there, lit up by the headlights like an opera villain, was Rachel, in neon pink leggings, a black Prada jacket that screamed money, and a megaphone in hand, her hair flowing like she'd stepped out of a shampoo commercial. She was pointing at my future deck and shouting, her amplified voice echoing through the neighborhood. "Dump it all now, let's end this abomination." The truck driver, a guy in a cap who looked as confused as I was, hesitated, but she slammed the hood and yelled, "Now, I said." I threw open the window and shouted back, "Rachel, are you insane?" But the sound of the concrete pouring drowned out my voice. It was midnight, and my backyard dream was turning into a grey slab under the command of a megaphone-wielding dictator. I flew out of the house like I had rockets on my feet, phone already in hand, recording everything. The truck, the concrete flowing like grey lava, and Rachel at the center of the chaos. Adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and I yelled, "Rachel, what the hell is this? You're destroying my backyard." She spun toward me with the speed of a hurricane, megaphone pressed to her face, eyes gleaming with a mix of fury and triumph. Her voice blasted through the neighborhood, distorted and deafening. "Noah, this is an HOA intervention to save our neighborhood from your hideous, disrespectful pool." The sound bounced off the nearby houses, and I saw curtains twitching. The residents of Maple Ridge, once asleep, now had free tickets to the midnight show. The guys from the truck, two brothers named Dave and Mikey, Dave with a scruffy beard and Mikey with a Yankees cap pulled down over his eyes, looked as bewildered as I was. They exchanged nervous glances, clutching a phone between them, scrolling frantically. "We thought it was an official order," Mikey muttered, while Dave shook his head and said, "She showed us a paper with a seal, man." I pointed at their phone and shouted over the engine noise, "Do you have permission for this? Show me." Before they could answer, the universe decided the circus needed a ringmaster, and he arrived with sirens and flashing lights. Police cars screeched to a stop on the street, cutting through the night like a knife. Officer Mike Donovan stepped out, a hulking guy who looked like he'd walked off the set of an 80s action movie. Broad shoulders, square jaw, and a goatee that screamed, "Don't mess with me." He held a maglite flashlight that doubled. As a lightsaber, its beam slicing through the darkness as he strode across the lawn. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" His voice was deep, calm, but carried that tone that made you want to confess crimes you didn't even commit. Rachel froze mid-shout, megaphone still raised, her neon leggings reflecting the flashlight beam like a tacky beacon. Silence fell for about 3 seconds, broken only by the gurgling of the concrete still dripping from the truck. I pointed, my phone at her, the camera catching every detail, and said, "She trespassed in my yard with a concrete truck, officer." Dave and Mikey threw their hands up like suspects in a police raid, and Mikey stammered, "We were just following orders." "I swear," Rachel lowered the megaphone slowly, the cynical smile melting off her face, and tried an authoritative tone. "I'm the HOA president, Officer Donovan. This is a legitimate action to protect Maple Ridge's aesthetic." Mike raised an eyebrow, crossed his arms, and replied dryly, "Legitimate or not, midnight isn't the time to dump concrete in anyone's yard. Let's talk, Mrs. Coleman." The flashlight beam locked on her, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Rachel switched gears in 2 seconds flat, like someone had hit an emergency button in her head, from megaphone dictator to helpless victim in the blink of an eye. "Officer Donovan, thank God you're here." Her voice now syrupy, almost theatrical, like she was auditioning for a damsel in distress role. "This pool is an imminent danger to Maple Ridge's safety and harmony." She reached into her Prada jacket pocket with a dramatic flourish and pulled out a crumpled paper, unfolding it with the pomp of someone presenting a royal decree. "Here's the official HOA order, signed and sealed." Donovan took the paper with his fingertips, like it was a suspicious artifact, and held it up to the flashlight. It was a grocery list, eggs, milk, cat food, with crooked scribbles in the margin that said something like, "Intervention approved." He read it for about 5 seconds, let out a deep laugh that echoed through the yard, and said, "Mrs. Coleman, this isn't a permit. This barely qualifies to buy bread. Dumping concrete on someone else's property is vandalism at minimum, and I'd say it's flirting with trespassing." I raised my phone, still recording, and jumped in. "Mike, I didn't authorize any of this. Not the truck, not the concrete, not this whole clown show. It's all on video here, from the megaphone to the neon leggings." My phone screen captured the chaos in high definition. The concrete hardening on the ground, the truck humming, and Rachel looking like she'd just realized the tables had turned. Donovan turned to me, nodded with a "Good job, Noah, that'll help," then fixed his eyes on her again, the flashlight still aimed like an interrogation spotlight. Meanwhile, Dave and Mikey, the truck brothers, saw their chance and decided it was time to bail. Dave tossed the phone to Mikey like it was a hot potato, and they started backing toward the truck, tripping over the concrete hose like two bumbling thieves in a Three Stooges flick. "We don't want trouble, boss," Mikey said, while Dave was already yanking the driver's door open, muttering something about never taking a job off WhatsApp again. But Rachel wasn't giving up that easily. She threw the megaphone to the ground with a thud, pointed a trembling finger at Donovan, and shouted, her voice reverting to enraged queen mode, You'll hear from my lawyer. This is persecution. I'm the guardian of Maple Ridge, and that pool is an affront to decency." Donovan crossed his arms, unfazed, and replied with a half-smile, "Ma'am, call whoever you want, but right now, you and that truck are leaving. Before I call backup, or a fine for disturbing the peace." The concrete stopped dripping, silence returned for a moment, and I could almost hear the sound of her defeat echoing into the night. The whole thing turned into a circus, the kind with clowns, trapeze artists, and a runaway elephant, just without the tent. Rachel, still standing in my yard like a statue of stubbornness, crossed her arms and stared down Donovan with a look that mixed contempt and desperation. "You don't have jurisdiction here, officer," she snapped, chin raised like she was in a medieval courtroom. "This is an internal HOA matter, a question of community governance." Donovan, unflappable, scratched his goatee with the tip of his flashlight and replied in the same calm tone he'd used to order coffee, "Vandalism's a crime, Mrs. Coleman, not neighborhood politics. And that concrete in his yard? No presidential post-it's gonna save it." She opened her mouth to argue, but the universe had other plans, and they came with a bang. A loud crack split the night, like off-season thunder. The truck, which Dave and Mikey were frantically trying to maneuver out of my yard, hit a buried power line, the one Tony had marked with fluorescent orange tape and a giant "Do Not Touch" sign in bold letters. The impact was instant. A blue flash sparked in the air, followed by a low hum, and half of Maple Ridge plunged into darkness. Lights went out in sequence like dominoes falling down the street. My phone, still recording, caught the exact moment. The streetlights flickered and died. I let out an involuntary "holy shit" while Dave yelled from the truck, "I told you it was a bad idea, Mikey." That's when the circus gained a new act. My grandma, Ruth, a 78-year-old woman with the spirit of a pirate and the energy of someone who downs espresso at 11 p.m., appeared on her porch 2 doors down. She was holding a camping lantern in one hand and her dog Rufus on a leash with the other. Dressed in cat-patterned flannel pajamas and a plaid robe, she aimed the light at us and shouted, her raspy voice cutting through the darkness. "Noah! Grab my hose, I'm going to douse this lunatic before she burns the whole neighborhood down." I almost laughed, but her look was dead serious. Ruth had faced floods, noisy neighbors, and even a rogue raccoon with that same "I'll fix it" with water energy. Donovan, seeing the chaos reach apocalyptic levels, grabbed the radio on his shoulder and called for backup. "Unit 12, I need support on Elm Street, situation out of control, and call the power company, we've got a severed cable." As he spoke, Rachel tried to hold her ground, the megaphone abandoned on the grass, her Prada jacket now splattered with concrete. But her phone started ringing non-stop, buzzing in her pocket like a fire alarm. She pulled it out and I caught the name on the screen. Vince. Probably the lawyer she'd threatened to call, or maybe her poor husband who already knew the mess she'd made. She ignored the call, tossed her hair back and shouted into the shadows, "This is an outrage. You'll pay for this humiliation." But the whole neighborhood was awake by now, flashlights flickering in windows and the sound of backup sirens echoed in the distance. My backyard was a war zone. My grandma was a loose cannon, and Rachel, she was sinking in her own circus, and I was still holding my phone, recording every second. Rachel changed her story about 6 times in under 15 minutes, like an actress, improvising lines for a script no one handed her. First, she insisted it was an HOA emergency action, gesturing at Donovan as if the megaphone were still in her hand. When he raised an eyebrow and asked for a document that wasn't a grocery list, she switched tactics fast. "Noah approved this verbally at a barbecue," she fired, pointing an accusing finger at me. I nearly choked laughing. "Barbecue? Rachel, I've never even seen you with a salad plate, let alone ribs." She ignored me, spun on her heels, and played her last card now with an almost pious tone. "Actually, I'm doing him a favor. That pool would have devalued the whole neighborhood, turned Maple Ridge into a 5th-rate water park." Donovan scribbled it all in his notebook, but you could see the corner of his mouth twitching, holding back a laugh. As she tangled herself in her own lies, the neighbors started gathering, drawn to the scandal like moths to a flame. Mr. Thompson, an 80-year-old who's lived here since the 70s, showed up in striped pajamas and slippers, leaning on a cane that looked older than he was. He shook his head, white hair fluttering in the breeze, and muttered in a raspy voice that had seen it all. The HOA was supposed to bring us together, organize teas and fix fences, not turn into this midnight circus. Others nodded. Mrs. Jenkins with her arms crossed, Mr. Patel holding a flashlight like a weapon. Even Emily, the tattoo artist, stepped out in a hoodie and a mug of tea, yelling, "Rachel, go to bed for God's sake." My grandma Ruth, still in her plaid robe, with Rufus barking on the leash, wasn't letting it slide. She dragged the hose across the lawn, the nozzle dripping, and aimed it at Rachel like a gunslinger in a western. "Go find something better to do, you nutcase," she shouted, and fired a jet of water that missed Rachel by about 2 meters, but hit the inflatable porcupine, which toppled dramatically to the side, defeated. The neighbors burst into laughter, and even Donovan had to turn his face to hide a grin. Rachel, drenched in humiliation, tried to yell something about disrespect, but the sound of the hose and Rufus's barking drowned her out. By 2 a.m., the power company finally showed up, a small truck with 2 guys in coveralls who fixed the cable in 20 minutes. The lights came back on with a collective hum, illuminating the hardened concrete in my yard, Dave and Mikey's truck, already disappearing around the corner, and Rachel with her Prada jacket now streaked with mud. Donovan holstered his radio, came over to me and said quietly enough for just me to hear, "Get a restraining order, Noah. This woman's a capital P problem, and keep that video. You'll need it." He handed Rachel a paper, a hefty fine, for damaging the power cable, and an official warning not to set foot in my yard again, under penalty of handcuffs. She snatched it with a huff, her phone still ringing with Vince on the screen, and stormed to her silver SUV, slamming the door hard enough to wake anyone still sleeping. The whole neighborhood stayed out on the street, laughing and swapping stories while my grandma handed me the hose and said, "Now that's family, Noah." The next morning I woke up with sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of fresh concrete wafting into the house, a bitter reminder of the night before. But I wasn't going to let it just be a bar story. I sat in my office, still in pajamas, and put together a dossier like a private detective. I sent the recordings to the HOA board in a polished email, a detailed report with dates, times, MP4 clips of the video, and even a photo of Rachel's megaphone abandoned in my yard, splattered with concrete and her neon leggings in the background. I attached Donovan's warning and her fine too, just to seal the deal. Subject line, "Emergency meeting, President's conduct." I sent it, took a deep breath, and waited for a reply. The board didn't waste time. They scheduled the meeting for 2 days later, in a short, curt message that read, "This can't wait." Rachel, of course, wasn't going down without one last move. Hours later, she replied to the board's email with a message dripping with fake sincerity. "I regret to inform you that I have an unavoidable medical appointment on the proposed date. My health is a priority, as you'll understand." A lie so obvious you could smell the fresh paint on her silver SUV. I pictured her writing it with a mimosa in hand, the inflatable porcupine swaying outside as a witness to her theatrics. The board ignored her excuse and held firm on the date. "Your presence isn't optional, Mrs. Coleman," Mr. Patel wrote, with the authority of someone who'd had enough. On the night of the meeting, the community room was packed. Folding tables, plastic chairs, and the smell of reheated coffee in the air. I brought my laptop, hooked it up to a projector borrowed from Emily, and played the video full screen. Rachel's megaphone blared through the speakers, "Dump it all now," followed by my Grandma Ruth's shouts and the trucks beeping. Mrs. Jenkins, sipping tea from a ceramic mug, choked and nearly fell off her chair, clutching her chest like she was about to have a laughing fit or a heart attack. "Good Lord, she's possessed," she exclaimed, fanning her face with an improvised paper fan. Mr. Patel, sitting beside her with his arms crossed, shook his head and said in a grave tone, "She's been sabotaging us for months. My garage got fined for excessive organization. What does that even mean?" That's when Emily, with her hair tied in a messy ponytail and a leather jacket slung over her shoulders, pulled out her phone and threw more fuel on the fire. "Check this out," she said, scrolling to show a list of absurd fines she'd received over the past few months. $70 for watering plants on an odd day, $30 for leaving my bike on the porch for over 2 hours. She's out of... Control! The murmurs in the room grew into a buzz of outrage until Mr. Thompson, the old man with the cane, raised his hand for silence. He adjusted himself in his chair, cleared his throat, and dropped a bombshell no one saw coming. I thought the name Vince sounded familiar. Vincent Russo. He's a real estate shark who buys up failing developments. I worked with him in the 80s. The guy's a predator. If Rachel's tied to him, this isn't just about a pool. The room went silent for about 5 seconds, the weight of the revelation hitting like an anvil. I exchanged a look with Emily, who whispered, "Holy shit, this is a conspiracy." Mrs. Jenkins slammed her mug on the table with a thud and said, "You mean she's trying to turn Maple Ridge into an investment for this Vince guy?" Mr. Patel narrowed his eyes, already piecing it together. Fines, crazy rules, sabotage. She's trying to devalue the neighborhood so he can buy it cheap. The video of Rachel still played in the background, her scream echoing like the soundtrack to a plot no one knew they were living. Until now. The scheme was brilliant and diabolical, a masterpiece of sleaze that could have come straight out of a con artist movie, just with less glamour and more neon leggings. Rachel and Vince were working together in a dirty dance to devalue Maple Ridge bit by bit. As HOA president, she fined everyone for ridiculous things. Emily's plant watered on the wrong day, my harmless porch cactus, Mr. Patel's overly organized garage. Each fine was a stab at the neighborhood's pride, a drop of poison to make us give up. And the sabotage? Pure strategy. My renovation, with the pool, deck and pergola, was a direct threat. A nice yard raises property values, draws attention, perks up the real estate market. They didn't want that. The plan was clear: break Maple Ridge's spirit, buy it up for pennies, dissolve the HOA, and throw up a forest of luxury condos with generic names like Serenity View Residences and prices no one here could ever afford. The proof landed in our laps like an early Christmas gift. Emily, who besides being a tattoo artist was a tech sleuth, suggested checking the HOA's official account, an email Rachel used for notices and fines. No one expected her to be so sloppy, but there it was. She hadn't even bothered to set up a separate Gmail to hide the game. Mr. Patel, with the patience of someone who's taken apart engines for fun, logged into the account with the default password she never changed, Maple Ridge 2020, obvious even for an amateur. And bingo, an email thread between her and Vincent Russo from the past few weeks, laying the scheme bare in black text and Arial 12. One, sent the night before the concrete attack, read, "Carter's pool is a problem. We'll handle it tonight. Don't let him finish." Another, older one, was even blunter. "Fines are working, 2 more houses on the brink, we can close in 6 months. It was like reading a comic book villain's diary, just without a black cape, but with an inflatable porcupine in the yard. The board was stunned, but not paralyzed. Mrs. Jenkins, eyes wide behind her gold-framed glasses, spoke first. "This is a crime, right? Like a real crime." Mr. Thompson, fidgeting with his cane like he wanted to use it for something more violent, confirmed, "Fraud, collusion, vandalism." Russo got investigated for this in Tacoma in the 90s. I opened the truck night video on my laptop, pausing at the moment Rachel yelled, "Dump it all now," and said, "We've got evidence. Video, emails, Donovan's fine." Emily printed the emails on a portable printer she'd brought, because of course she had one, and Mr. Patel stuffed it all into a manila envelope. "For the prosecutor," he said with a glint in his eye I'd never seen before. "This woman's not taking down Maple Ridge without a fight." The next morning, the board delivered the full package to the county prosecutor, a bald guy named Larry Ortiz, who listened to the story with the face of someone who'd seen it all, but got visibly intrigued by the megaphone-wielding Rachel video. It blew up fast. Within 48 hours, the prosecutor's office opened an official investigation. Rachel Coleman and Vincent Russo were in the crosshairs for real estate fraud, document forgery, and property damage. The whole neighborhood found out. Mrs. Jenkins spread the gossip faster than the wind, and for the first time in months Maple Ridge felt united. My Grandma Ruth, sipping coffee on her porch, laughed and said, "I knew that woman was trouble the day she brought that porcupine here." 2 weeks later, the hammer dropped, and it dropped hard. Rachel Coleman was arrested on a chilly autumn morning, handcuffed in front of the silver SUV she loved so much, while neighbors peeked through curtains with a mix of shock and satisfaction. The list of charges was a full-blown crime novel: real estate fraud, conspiracy, attempted vandalism, document forgery, and even disturbing the peace. Prosecutor Ortiz threw the whole book at her, and rightly so. Vincent Russo, the suit-wearing Jacques, who thought he could swallow Maple Ridge, saw the walls closing in and jumped ship before it sank completely. He took a plea deal to avoid a full sentence, handing over a treasure trove of evidence, spreadsheets detailing every fine as part of the plan, recordings of calls with Rachel barking orders like, "Shut down Carter's yard," and even a timeline to buy the neighborhood for scraps. The guy traded jail for an ankle monitor and a deal to testify, cowardly but smart. The scandal became a local fever, a soap opera no one in Maple Ridge could stop watching. A sharp reporter from the town's little paper, the Maple Times, dubbed it Concrete Gate, and the name caught on like wildfire. It made headlines across the county, with photos of the concrete truck and Rachel with her megaphone plastered on the front page. But the real phenomenon was my Grandma Ruth. Someone, probably Emily, uploaded the Chaos Night video to the neighborhood's TikTok, and the scene of her with the hose yelling, "Go find something better to do," as the inflatable porcupine toppled, blew up. Hose Lady became a trend. Teens were making dance videos mimicking the water jet, and the clip hit 200,000 views in 3 days. Ruth, who didn't even know what TikTok was, laughed on her porch with Rufus in her lap, saying, "If I'd known all it took to get famous was hosing down a nutcase, I'd have done it years ago." In court, Rachel tried to pull out all the charm for her grand finale. She showed up in a pristine grey suit, hair in a perfect bun, understated makeup, the full "I'm a model citizen, Your Honor" package. She sat in the defendant's chair with a rehearsed smile, as if she could hypnotize the judge with a look and a sob story. It didn't work. The judge, a middle-aged man named Harold Grayson with thick-framed glasses and zero patience for theatrics, read the charges in a monotone that crushed her hopes with every syllable. When he got to the suggested sentence, 15 years in prison, her face collapsed. The smile turned into a grimace, her shoulders slumped, and she let out an, "This is an outrage." That echoed through the courtroom. The prosecutor offered a deal: 4 years behind bars, hefty fines that'd make even Vince Russo cry, and full restitution for everyone she'd find with her made-up rules: me, Emily, Mr. Patel, even Mrs. Jenkins, who'd been hit with $20 for excess cookies on the porch. Rachel accepted, head bowed, knowing the game was up. And the inflatable porcupine, the ultimate symbol of her madness, became an auction item. The HOA board, now under Mr. Thompson's temporary leadership, decided to sell it to help cover her debts to the neighborhood. It fetched $150 at a community event, bought by Emily, who said she'd use it as ironic decor in her tattoo studio. The cash went straight to the restitution fund, and Maple Ridge let out a collective sigh of relief. My grandma, watching the auction with a coffee mug in hand, laughed and said, "At least the thing's getting a happy ending." Rachel, though, good luck in jail with that bun. Concrete Gate was over, but my backyard, that I was going to finish, now with the whole neighborhood's support. Maple Ridge rose from the ashes of Concrete Gate like a phoenix smelling of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke. The new board, led by Mr. Thompson, the old man with the cane who now carried the gleam of a retired general, took the reins with a clear mission: erase the traces of Rachel's tyranny. At the first meeting, my pool, deck and pergola were unanimously approved, with applause that nearly toppled the plastic chairs in the community room. Mr. Patel raised his hand and proposed scrapping the dumb fees she'd invented. "No, more fines for cacti or watering plants on odd days," he said, and Mrs. Jenkins shouted an amen that had everyone laughing. The HOA went back to what Mr. Thompson always wanted: a force to unite, not divide. And my backyard, it became the symbol that we'd won. Last week I christened the space with a party Maple Ridge hadn't seen since the 90s. The sun was shining, the pergola glowed with hanging lights, which now, yes, looked like stars, and the pool reflected the blue sky like a mirror. Tony took over the built-in grill on the deck, singing O Sol Mio while flipping ribs with a spatula, his Italian accent filling the air alongside the smell of smoked meat. The neighborhood kids, Emily's nephews, Mrs. Jenkins' grandkids, splashed in the pool shouting and laughing, while Mr. Patel tossed a ball with them, proving retirement doesn't mean slowing down. Lisa, my genius landscaper, tweaked the pergola's vines, proud of the moss green now climbing the beams. That's when Mrs. Jenkins, with a tray of fresh-baked cookies in hand, pulled me into a tight hug, the kind that smells of vanilla and warmth. "You saved us, Noah," she said, eyes misty. "Without you, we'd still be paying fines for breathing." My grandma Ruth, parked in a lawn chair with Rufus in her lap and a cold beer in hand, chimed in with that raspy tone of someone who's lived it all. That pool beat the concrete crazy, and so did we, hose in hand, justice in heart. The crowd burst into laughter, raising glasses and cans in an impromptu toast. Her TikTok video was still circulating. Hose Lady had become a local legend. But there at the party, she was just Ruth, the grandma, who took down a villain with water and grit. The whole neighborhood showed up, Emily tattooing a porcupine. Design on a client on the porch, Mr. Thompson spinning 70s stories, even Officer Donovan off duty, swung by with a beer and a congrats Carter. This turned out nice. The last word on Rachel came as the cherry on top. In prison, she didn't drop her bossy habits. She tried starting a yard decor committee, insisting on rules for table placement and the prison's wilted plants. The inmates, who couldn't care less about her suit-wearing charm, nicknamed her HOA Psycho, and shot down every idea. One of them, rumor has it, threw a cup of water in her face and said, "No pergolas for you to screw up here." Rachel, in an orange jumpsuit, was now just a shadow of the authoritarian president she'd been, serving her 4 years with fines that had never erased the damage she'd dreamed of doing. Me. I'm enjoying my pergola. The sound of water in the pool, the smell of oak from the deck. The security cameras are rolling, recording the yard 24/7. Not out of paranoia, but caution. If another Rachel shows up, I've got the video. Ruth's hose and a whole neighborhood behind me. Winning feels good. Soaking in the sun while the kids laugh is even better. But seeing the villain in orange, defeated and ridiculed, that, my friends, is pure poetry. The kind that deserves a Tony Opera and a toast with cold beer.